Welcome to BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. Sean Fitz with me. We are talking about Penn State football, recapping the first week of spring practice. I can't believe it's already a quarter of the way over, Fitz. I mean, how time flies. We got to talk to James Franklin exactly 1 week ago, and now we're here to talk about what we know of what happened since then. And, of course, that's coming up on the show. Bunch of other things, and to peek behind the curtain here for all of you. Fitz is the expert. He's the guy that knows what's going on. He's the one that's going to give you the information. My job is to arrange things in the most interesting way possible for you, the things you want to know, and then present them to you in a way that makes sense. So there's no other place that we can start with today's show, the things you want to know other than Nate Bauer golfing, which, of course, is the number one thing everyone. The reason Nate isn't here, he is currently on vacation. This is a live look at what he's doing right now. Not really live, but is this a good golf swing? I have no clue. Like, is he doing a good job there, Fitz?
He's doing a great job because he's playing golf in Arizona and we're sitting here in Pennsylvania on a podcast. So, yeah, I think he's doing okay out there, obviously, on vacation with the wife this week. So there's a lot of jealousy coming through in this one. I doubt he's up early to watch the show, but if he is, go to hell. But no, I mean, it's been what I'm getting all week. He's been texting me and Andrew Dorita videos and scorecards and all this kind of stuff. If you notice his swing, he doesn't like to talk about it, but he tore his ACL one time. And that's, it affected his movement, but hey, he hit it straight. He's enjoying himself. I think he's really become accustomed to desert golf, and yeah, good for Nate. Good for Nate. We're happy for him. We're really, 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 really happy for him.
He can tell. He can tell. We can all tell, Fitz. We got, like I said, we got a lot of stuff coming up on the show today. Fitz's recruiting update, because there was, I'd say the biggest news, what's going on at camp is one thing, but Penn State got a lot in triplets, got good news on Saturday. We'll get into that in just 1 second. And of course, the BWI Mailbag. We'll be talking about Pro Day. We're going to be talking about spring football, camp battles, and James Franklin. We have a surprise Between the Lines, Andy and Ari show, On3's flagship show. He appeared for an extended interview with them. We're going to talk about just a couple of the most interesting things that he talked about with them. Of course, you can go check that show out after you're done listening to us. All that coming up on today's show. But the first thing I want to let everybody know, Fitz, is that it's a good time to subscribe to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, because in your information we're going to get to, we're not going to be able to get to all of it. We're not going to get to some of the nitty-gritty details that stay on the message board. So subscribe right now for just $1. You can try us out. And then, Fitz, tell them a little bit about what they can get over on the site other than what I just mentioned.
Great time of year for our coverage. If you like Penn State football, if you like Penn State recruiting, I know a lot of things are changing in college sports, but I think our coverage is pretty standard in terms of what's going across the waves in Happy Valley. We had offensive notebook on Sunday, defensive notebook yesterday from spring practice, lots of stuff crammed in there. Ryan Snyder did a wonderful recap of the weekend. And recap is tough, because recap seems like it's just kind of, clickbaity, gloss over type thing. He got some juice and, had a really nice notebook on Monday. So there's a lot to work with. There's a lot to read, a lot to digest. And I think our board is heating back up. And we talked about it in February, when it just kind of dipped in early March, really. Like this Penn State schedule so far behind everybody, kind of let people collectively catch their breath after the season, obviously, but at the same time, it was a deep breath. So it was a while. So they're back into it. And I think a wonderful recruiting weekend for Penn State. I mean, you talk about not hosting visitors for the first 3 weeks of March, and then all of a sudden you get back into it and you hit the ground running, because Khalil Taylor, a top 20 prospect, according to On3 in the 2027 class, committed on Saturday. He was also up Tuesday. This is one that we were tracking along with David Davis, who recently committed. And it was a big step forward for Penn State to sort of reestablish themselves on the national radar after just being silent for so long.
Yeah, and let's dig into it in Fitz's recruiting update. Fitz's recruiting update here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Want to mention as well, if you subscribe to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel right now, between now and the Blue White game, Blue White weekend, we're going to be picking 5 new subscribers to the YouTube channel to win a subscription to the site. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, like the video as well. Always super helpful. So let's recap again. Khalil Taylor, Nittany Lion, and a big damn deal, it seems, Fitz.
Yeah, I'd say so. And yes, definitely check that out. Subscribe to the page, a YouTube page. It helps us out. And yeah, T. Frank got this one done on his own for the people. He is for the people. So Khalil Taylor, if we're going to get back into it, number 32 on the On3 industry, number 4 wide receiver, number 2 in Pennsylvania. On3 has him higher, number 16 overall, number 2 receiver, number 2 in Pennsylvania. I got to say, after the show last week on the 2027 recruiting rankings, where I say don't buy into these too early, I'm still going to double down on that. Like, it's still way too early for 2027 rankings, but this kid can really play. Like, there's no doubt about it. Him and Keemon Spell, who we'll talk about in a second, 2 of the best in Western Pennsylvania, bar none. Like, I don't see this as a situation where it tapers off all that much. I mean, you guys might see some guys that jump ahead of them, but at the same time, Khalil Taylor can really play. He's been on Penn State's radar for a while. Penn State doing extremely well in Western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area. You don't want to say getting whoever they want, but I mean, when you've got a 2027 kid who's a top 20 player in his class that is ready to jump on board, or you've got 2 of them like Penn State does, to see them make decisions this early kind of says how overly dominant Penn State has been in that area. So Terry Smith's done a wonderful job. Marcus Hagens was in this one. You've got a lot of pulling the rope for Penn State, and you've got a lot of buy-in from Western Pennsylvania, which, really hasn't always been the case. They've put a lot of work into getting where they're at in Western Pennsylvania. So
how important is that? I mean, just to underline this, and this is not a shot or anything, although if you're a Penn State fan, you can probably revel in it. Pitt seems like a non-factor in their own front yard because Penn State is able to get the players they want from that side of the state, where maybe 20 years ago that wasn't the case. Like, how important is this that Penn State has seemingly been able to put such an assault on that side of the state and lock it down the way they have?
There's certainly correlation there. You look at the emphasis that Pitt has put on staying home, and I think that there was a point where they reached where they said, you know what, if you don't want us, we don't want you. And it kind of cost them with some guys, and it kind of cost them, more importantly, with some coaches, some trainers, some guys, some folks in the recruiting, the constant guys that are there with the recruiting process. Not players cycle through, but coaches stay and things like that. And they've done Pitt's done some really good scouting. I know. I think Cruz Brookins was a really good player, a really good safety that I thought Penn State maybe would take a chance on. They did not, and it ends up that Cruz Brookins looks like a pretty good player for Pitt. And so there's still those guys to be found, but they haven't put the emphasis on Western Pennsylvania, on WPIAL like you probably thought they would. You talk about potential regional threats, and you see what Maryland has done. And this is like before, this is even before NIL. You see what Maryland does where they grab 1 or 2 guys that probably are just like national guys that end up at Maryland. Stephon Diggs, for example. You've got those type of guys. Pitt was doing that. They did it with DeMar Hamlin. They did it with Paris Ford. They did it with some really, really good players. But that's kind of tapered off as well. So I'm very curious what the vibes are, what the allure is for the kids there. And they went to Florida. They went all over the place to sort of kind of find their niche. And I think it's cost them on the home front. I think Penn State's kind of moved in there. Terry Smith, obviously, the connections that he has are akin to what we talked about with Jaywan Sider in Florida. So he can walk in anywhere, and guys are interested. And they're getting on guys so early. Like, they know the trainers that can point these guys out as 8th graders, and they offer these guys as 8th graders and 9th graders. Not all of them pan out. Not all of them end up with committable offers. But the fact that they're there and the fact that they've put that much work into it, I think kind of shows. And I think they've tried to do that in Philly. I think Pittsburgh and Philly are entirely different entities. And you know that if you follow Pennsylvania at all. Yeah. Like, these are 2 different things. But Pittsburgh seems to be in its own bubble. And I think Penn State has expanded that to include themselves. And I think they've done a really good job. It should be commended for it. I think it's been quite a turnaround, because if you look at, the early years of James Franklin, even Bill O'Brien, there was some buzz there. There was some talk that Tyler Boyd would have committed to Bill O'Brien had he stayed. Those right. Kind of little things. Now you kind of expect Penn State to get those guys, and I think that's been a big step for Penn State in establishing themselves in that area. And again, it's, I don't want to call it isolated because it's Pittsburgh, right? It's a big city. But you don't hear as much about, the stuff that you hear in the DMV with NIL and the guys that are involved in all that kind of stuff. So I think Pittsburgh is really sort of
it's got a Penn State vibe in terms of the blue collar attitude, right? I mean, that part of Penn State's identity feels alive in the conversations around guys coming to the area. And I don't want to simplify it too much, but I think that there's we've talked about this before, and Ryan Snyder, on a recruiting show has mentioned guys in Philly tend to look south more often than guys in Pittsburgh. And I think that's, kind of maybe what you're talking about here. Maybe I'm talking around it instead of the point you're trying to make.
I think so. But Pitt is a workmanlike program. West Virginia right there is a workmanlike program. I think you've seen the difference in consistency and success. Pitt's been pretty consistent, but it hasn't been a 10-win consistent program. And you see sort of the separation there. And then when guys come to campus for games and you see 110,000 people at one game and you see whatever the numbers are at another game, that makes a difference. So I think you've kind of looked at that and kind of seen the separation there. So yeah, I think that yes, it does ring, it rings true for a lot of those guys, but I think just kind of the consistency and the separation that they've showed from those other programs has made a difference.
So this question here from Florida Cop 911, who says, why can't we get a big wide receiver from the DMV? I'm not going to ask you that question. I do want to ask you the question of Khalil Taylor and that idea of getting a big time wide receiver. 2027, too early. Totally understand. Do you think there is the opportunity here? Because the one guy theory that I have of it just takes one guy to spark off a run at a position. A Saquon Barkley leads to a lineage that you have to keep up, but you have that opportunity to say, hey, you can go to the league, you can be a superstar if you come to this school and play this position. Penn State had an opportunity at that with Chris Godwin, kind of, and it never really went anywhere. Like, we obviously know why. There were some issues with, the position and staffing and things like that. So I guess in terms of the lineage at the receiver position for Penn State, is there an opportunity here, or do you see one that they've already made to restart that run at that position of consistently getting guys into the program that can be difference makers on the field that James Franklin has talked about, guys that the league fears?
Yeah, that's a big conversation because, well, I mean, they're what, 4 years now removed from a first round pick in Jahan Dotson. So there was, it's the bigger conversation here is the lack of consistency across the board. And that I thought Trey Wallace was a pretty good player.
Yes.
But you look at the consistency that they had down the board. You mentioned Chris Godwin, but also you have to mention Deshaun Hamilton. You have to mention Saeed Blacknell, who came up in big spot. He didn't have, if you look back at Saeed Blacknell's numbers, they're nothing special, but he came up in big moments and made it
when
work.
They happened. Yeah.
And then KJ came through, and you expected Justin Shorter to be something. He wasn't. But at the flip side, you have Jahan Dotson, which is actually kind of the crux of recruiting receivers is, yes, you think all these guys are talented because all these guys are big fish and all these guys are more athletic and all these guys are better players than the guys that they play against in high school. And then they get to college and it's a different story. And I think Penn State's ran into that over the years with, you look back at that 2022 class and a couple of those guys, Christian Driver's gone, Tyler Johnson's gone, Caden Saunders has been banged up, and you're waiting for Anthony Ivy to do anything really. And, and Omari Evans is gone. So that's kind of what you look at. It's not always a position where if you throw numbers at him, it's just going to cream of the crop rise to the top. And whereas maybe with the offensive line, another position that you throw numbers at like that, it happens. Defensive line, maybe like that, it happens. So we're so far removed from just the consistency factor of a Mitchell Tinsley.
Yeah.
Mitchell Tinsley, this squad would use a Mitchell Tinsley and be very happy with a Mitchell
Parker
Tinsley.
Washington.
You're hoping that, maybe Kyron Hudson's that guy. But yeah, it's just, it's so fascinating. And you look at the recruiting that they've done in 2026 class, they've got Jasier Rogers, who I'm incredibly high on out of Delaware. LeVar Keys, who I mentioned before, that is a really good prospect as well out of DeMatha. You just got to find the guys that work. And someone said about getting a receiver from the DMV. Well, you get a receiver from the DMV, you get a receiver from Pittsburgh, you get a receiver from Jersey, you get a receiver from Florida, whatever. It's like the height discussion. What's the best height for a wide receiver? The best height for a wide receiver is just being a great wide receiver. It doesn't matter where they're from. If you can find them, it makes sense. I mean, I did not have Kobe Howard as the guy out of this class that's making the early waves. Not saying that he's going to, step in and be a starter, be a guy that plays a lot, but like among the guys that we thought were going to come in and maybe do something, you thought maybe Matt Otten would be the guy. Well, Kobe Howard's the guy. So, or I don't want to call him the guy. That's
he's the guy that's impressed early. Anyway,
right.
He's the looks like game and has some of the things you're looking for. Not necessarily the guy who's gonna be the guy.
Don't you do it, Eggman. I'm looking at the chat here, but there's a couple different things around the going through the chat. Yes, Z-Man says the Whippy will be huge in the 70s and 90s. I think the talent has dissipated a bit, but I said it earlier, I guess it was last week on the recruiting show, what the guys at Evolve are doing, what the guys that, 4112 are doing, the interest and the dedication that some people have put into rising that product back up in the Whippeal has been noticed. And you see that not just in the 7-on-7, but also, places like North Allegheny, Central Catholic, these big time schools have big time programs for a reason. And it's going back to that word, it's the consistency that these guys are able to put through. And you've got really good players. And hey, sometimes your best player is your 5'6" nose guard because he can make plays. But when you're talking about recruiting, that guy doesn't get recruited. It's just part of that transition from high school to college. So yes, I think there's been a breakup, and I think it's population demographics. I think it's people moving, with the industry and everything like that. But there's still some really, really good players out in Western Pennsylvania. Notably, what Christian says is get anyone from Aliquippa. That's a pretty good idea because just from talking to people over the last couple of years, of course, Tyke Hayes signed with Penn State. Zariah Fisher is an Aliquippa guy. You've got MJ Devonshire went to Kentucky and came back to Pitt and had a pretty good career at Pitt. Like these Aliquippa kids are built different. And we talk about the structure of a Central Catholic or a North Allegheny or some of the TJ and some of the other schools in Western Pennsylvania. And Aliquippa is a little bit different, but they get it done. And those guys come in, they're ready to work. And you're seeing it with Tyke Hayes on campus already. This is a guy that I think the quote was everything's important to him. And you see that in his work ethic. And I think you're going to see in the field. I think he's going to have a really good career. So that's our dip into Western Pennsylvania. Penn State's been there for a while. So I think a lot of it's rehashing, but it's also important to note that the effort has been what has gotten them back there. And I think Terry Smith is obviously a huge part of that.
So Khalil Taylor aside, Penn State reaffirmed commitments from two very important players, one in the class of 2026. A lot of this deals with 27, but Messiah Mickens is a big deal for the Nittany Lions class of 2026. Big news this weekend is that he is shutting down his recruiting. He's committed to the Nittany Lions. What do you know of how all of this unfolded, and what do you want to share here on the show in terms of how Penn State was able to make such a U-turn in the way things were going between Mickens and the program and new running back coach Stan Drayton in a weekend or however long it's been?
Yeah, I think, obviously there's always outside stuff at play here when you're talking about that. But if you're talking about the recruiting part of it, I think Stan Drayton is huge. Those guys came up and they saw Stan Drayton in action at practice this weekend. And that is an impressive thing to see for guys that are getting a first impression of not just the relationship, but the guy that is going to be coaching them every day, the guy that is going to be coaching their teammates / competition every day. And I think that makes a big deal. You see how these guys work, and they had a tremendous respect for Jay Wansider. We all do. And it's one of those things where, yes, everything that you committed to at Penn State, with the exception of one person, that's a generality right there, but the exception of one person is still here. And I think that's kind of what you have to remind those guys. And then you hand the baton to Drayton and say, make them fit in or make them feel welcome, make them fit in, make them visualize how they're going to look in this uniform. And I think that makes a big deal. And again, I think there's value in keeping your guys from a talent perspective, number one, but from a PR perspective, it hurts to lose guys to Notre Dame. It hurts to lose guys to Ohio State. It hurts to lose guys to wherever else they're trying to visit. So yes, I think it makes sense to give Drayton the credit, but at the same time, think it's a team effort for everybody to sort of coordinate this. And I think they've done a great job. I mean, both guys did interviews with the collective after the practice and after the reaffirmation and everything like that. So yeah, I think there's some math to be done there. But yeah, it's been a really, really good weekend for Penn State. And again, I'm really high on Keemon Spell. I think he's really one of the better backs we've seen in Pennsylvania in a long, long time. Mickens is very, very good as well. But both of those guys can really play. And you talk about the level in the room. We just talked about Tyke Hayes, but Quentin Martin and Corey Smith both showed a little bit as true freshmen. And of course, there's a couple of guys that are starting that are pretty good players. So continue to sell what Penn State does at the running back or at the running back position, and just basically how they'll be used and how they'll be, I don't want to say leaned upon, but how they'll be, I'm talking myself into a corner here, how they will be, how they'll fit in at Penn State.
Yeah, and running back is an important position in the Penn State offense. We've seen that for a long time now, that this is not a team that's going to throw the ball 60 times a game if they can help it. They want to play a balanced game, and the running back is very much alive and important at Penn State. So these guys absolutely are part of the future, and just reminding them of the opportunity here. You don't have to go to Notre Dame, which has a similar philosophy to make all of that happen. Of course, you can check out more here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Appreciate you being here for Fitz's recruiting update. Now, Fitz, I'm going to lean on you again, but this time we're talking about beer at Antifragile, which I know is another one of a thing you're an expert on. So tell us about today's sponsor, Antifragile Brewing Company.
Yes, we love Antifragile, obviously, just as a sponsor and as a place that we like to actually go ourselves. The best beer in State College, downtown in Calder Way. Great news, T. Frank, and I'm not sure if you got to it on the show, one of the shows last week, but the cheesesteaks are back. We had a scare. It was a really scary time for a week and a half for this or so, where John's was out there without their cheesesteaks, but they are back. If you go there, they will make them for you. It's not quite actually, the last time I talked to John, the owner, they were waiting on some final things to come through, but there are cheesesteaks, and the town rejoiced. I saw some photos or some videos last week. People were lined up at the in the alley, ready to go. So we're happy to see them. I'm happy to see them.
We're not hyping this up. People were not happy for the week and a half that those cheesesteaks were gone. We support this Antifragile because they support us, but also because they make good stuff, and people in State College absolutely love it.
I am jonesing for a cheesesteak. I have not had one. I hope to get down there over the weekend, but did not happen. Yeah, man, they're back, and I'm really happy about that. And I'm also happy about their beer. Hazies, Pilsners. I've matured. I've graduated back to Pilsner. It's funny. When you're in college, you drink the light stuff, the Pilsners. Yeah. Then you could kind of move up. And I was an IPA guy there for a while. Those things put me to sleep anymore. So I've moved back to the Pilsner.
Got to dial it back down.
We're coming out of stout season, porter season. But they have a little bit of everything. Paulo does wonderful, wonderful work crafting that stuff. And they make it all in-house. They've also got kombucha. They've got mixed drinks. They've got a little bit of everything. And they've got a great atmosphere. Probably my favorite thing about it. Beer's great. Cheesesteaks are great. But the people are what make a business, a small business, a local business. And the people are great too. So we appreciate their supporting our program and supporting our everything that we do, because we like to support them. So appreciate those guys.
I shouldn't be talking about not drinking beer when talking about Antifragile, but when I used to drink beer, there's nothing I loved more than a stout, like a beer you could almost chew. Mm-hmm. Like it was that thick, like it reminds you, it puts hair on your chest in the winter. I always enjoyed those ones. Those ones, as you might have noticed, when all of it, people make fun of me. James Franklin always points out when I have one button too low on my quarter zip or whatever, that I had a few porters and stouts in my day. Anyway, Fitz, I can tell I'm veering off the road, so let's get into some spring practice.
I was trying to see how you had one button too low on your quarter zip. I don't know. Do you have a button and a zip shirt? Is that a thing? It sounds like a Nate thing, but.
Yeah, I don't have anything other than, I messed that one up. I was trying to think of a polo, but for some reason, I have this game when I can't think of a word at home. I just yell noun at my wife. I'll be like, hey, can you grab the noun? But here on the show, that doesn't really work. So I was trying to say noun in my head because I couldn't think of polo. So I just came up with quarter zip.
Talking live is tough, man. Like you like I'll forget a guy's name. Like I do that all the time. And people in the chat are like, "You idiot! Why wouldn't you remember that?" And I'm just like, "Dude, this hamster does not always run at full speed." So we're working through it, and I think we do a pretty good job. And I think our folks that are following the show think that too. And I appreciate that. And once again, implore you to subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the site, but also like and share this video because it does help us out. We appreciate you guys.
Appreciate you all and appreciate the extemporaneous speaking can be hard. And we don't script these things, but we do have a lot of information just stored up there in the old noggin. And Fitz has been the person that's been getting all the info and the intel about spring practice. And he's going to share that with you now, which is what everyone wants to know. This is the beauty of like working with the people at Blue White Illustrated, which I have not worked with them before and then worked with them now in my current job. And this is way better on this side of the fence because the things you want to know about what's going on in spring practice, this is where you find out. These are the information centers of, people aren't at practice every single day, but we have our ways of finding that out. And Fitz is going to share some of that with you right now here on the show. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Fitz. You're the star of today's show with the recruiting update and now with spring practice. What have you learned about the Penn State offense and defense so far through the first week?
This has been big on the board in the last couple of days. And yes, we have information, but I also have to get out with the caveat that they've got 3 practices in. They had 2 unpadded practices, and they got after it on Saturday. They're going to go back at it tonight. We're going to actually see a portion of practice. I'm not sure how long that's going to be. And then we're going to get James Franklin, a few assistants, and some players tonight. So the access that you're used to during the season on a Wednesday is going to be Tuesdays this spring. So we're going to be back at it tonight. So definitely check out the site tonight for more notes. But before we get there, a bunch of stuff happening, some good vibes, some, spring practice is always a situation of where you sort of see some separation and then you come back and you kind of figure out partially your identity as a team. Now you can only do so much until the games are played, but you're feeling pretty confident about some of these guys that make some plays. Starting with those receivers that we talked about before, the transfer receivers, I think that you're probably going to hear some buzz coming out of Franklin tonight, where you're talking about Kyron Hudson, you're talking about Devontae Ross, just give you a little bit something different. And sometimes that refresh is exactly what you need, and they're going up against some pretty good guys in the secondary. But both of those guys have made some plays. I know I had some sort of, I don't want to call them doubts. We talk about Kyron Hudson, but he's not a burner. He's not going to go out and run a 4.4 or anything like that, but he's a guy that's got some good hands. He made a one-handed catch at practice the other day, drew some wows from both sides of the field. And that was pretty cool. And then you've got Devontae Ross, who gives you kind of something different, and smaller guy that is shifty, can move. Again, I don't think he's going to come out and run a 4.3. I think people maybe see his size and think that he is an automatic 4.3 guy. I don't think he is, and
because he was a deep threat, because the way he was used previously makes you think he was super fast.
Yeah, I think that you look at what he brings to the table, and it's not, to bring the board discussion into it. Somebody mentioned in the set of notes that it looks like Penn State doesn't have any downfield speed. They do have speed at the outside receiver spot, but they had a lot of speed last year. They had a ton of speed.
Yeah.
Did it come to fruition all the time? Not so much. And we're not going to get into whether that's the offense, whether that's Drew, whether it's receivers, whatever, but it's not all about just speed. And if you've got guys with a general feel for the position, and I know Jahan was fast, and I know Chris Godwin was fast and all those guys, but when you have guys with a general feel for the position, like Parker Washington, who, what was he, a 4.5 guy, something like that?
And probably wasn't his last year because he was banged up for most of the year. But
he broke his leg. That'll drive the 40 time way up. But no, you've got guys that have an opportunity to make plays on the football and really sort of diversify your passing game a bit. And obviously, I think that's the theme going into this year. You don't have Tyler Warren anymore, so you're going to see more of those wide receivers get targets, and you're going to eventually have to do something with them. Ross does some nice things on the outside, catching the ball, getting upfield, and getting that acceleration. He's not Tez Johnson. Like he came from Troy. Like Tez.
Everyone wants to make the comparisons either by size with KJ Hamler or by school with Tez Johnson, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's why you've got unrealistic expectations for every wide receiver that's in the portal. Like that's kind of, you always draw the exception rather than the rule. But I think that Ross has done some good things, but it's same type of thing. Catch the ball, accelerate, and make the most out of it. And I think Ross can do that. How they fill out the 2 deep, the 6 receiver spots, I don't know, but I think those guys have been pleasant surprises for Penn State so far. And they've, I think they've kind of established themselves in the room is probably a bit redundant when you talk about them being here for a couple of months, but when you see it on the field, you know it. And I think those guys have done a better job than probably we heard on the transfer edition from last year, just
So
at this time.
There's a couple of things that I think are important, and you mentioned this, and we've talked about like finding outside receivers, and I think it's important for a couple of reasons. First off, they're both going to play in the slot. They're going to motion around. Andy Kotelnicki, well, last week's show, I called it Yahtzee. You got 5 dice in a cup, and you roll them out on the mat, and that's where they line up. That's kind of how it feels sometimes with the 5 eligibles in Andy Kotelnicki's offense. But you are going to have a lot of 12 personnel. This team still likes its tight ends. So if you've got 12 personnel, those outside receivers are going to line up outside. They have to line up. One of them has to be on the line of scrimmage. The other one is going to be, you're not going to have the protection of the formation. So Ross and Hudson being able to win on the outside is really important. So that initial surge of Ross getting bigger and, showing some of those things of being able to play on the outside, create separation, those are essential. Like, I think that's essential to the success of what we're trying to do here. And then secondly, just as a point to add what you're talking about, when it comes to deep speed, there's a threshold. Like, there is a certain amount of speed you need, and then everything over that is gravy. That's, I think, the important thing is, do they have the threshold to be a deep threat? Not, do you run the fastest so that you can be a bad receiver and still get open? That's, I think, a nuanced conversation about deep receiving that we don't have often.
Creating separation has taken on a life of its own in terms of how much can this wide receiver who is playing against this defensive back who is playing man coverage, how far can he get away from it? But that's not always the case. You're talking about scheme, you're talking about spacing, you're talking about running levels and getting guys that are open. And I think that's got to be an emphasis for Andy Kotelnicki this year, is putting those guys in a position where they're not running on top of each other. And some of that sometimes is guys running the wrong routes and things, but also like you can scheme guys open. I mean, It was funny. I was listening to James this morning talk on Andy and Ari on the On3 network, which you should definitely check out. But he talked about Devontae Ross against Iowa, and it wasn't a situation where Devontae Ross was going out and shaking people, crazy, and those guys were falling down because of it and all that stuff. Yeah. But like, they schemed him open. They did a great job, and he was wide open. And the blowback on that was, well, he did it against Iowa, but he was wide open. Well, I would love to see some Penn State receivers that open. Like, right. If that's going to be part of the scheme, if that's going to be part of the player, whatever it's going to be, put your guys in a position to succeed, and they will do that for the most part. I mean, you look at Penn State's receivers last year, and I think it was a different kind of bad than 2 years ago. The drops went way down, which is, I think it is, sort of a boost for, Hagen's a boost for those guys that are in the room that were doing
Aller's confidence,
Aller's confidence, and that all plays into it. But I'm just saying from a wide receiver perspective, like the drops went down. So, some of the other issues that cropped up were not great. But the drops were down. That's a step. You got to take steps, and you got to, as I mentioned earlier, you take a Mitchell Tinsley. You don't have to be a superstar. You don't have to be a guy that's, consistently, going to score 10 touchdowns this year. You've got guys that can probably open you up a little bit more, and I think that's going to help. And you got Luke Reynolds, who I think is really, really going to change some things in this offense. Change some things in this offense implies that Tyler Warren didn't change everything in this offense, but you come back around to it. I think you've got a guy that's a threat right there that can line up all over the field, that can do a lot of different things for you.
And a more established vertical presence in the offense as well. And Tyler Warren, if you look at the target distribution, tight ends should not be leading you in deep targets. But if there's a specialty for Luke Reynolds, he is big, he is athletic, and he can jump. In fact, I think it's something that James Franklin doesn't want him jumping on literally every single pass, because you want to stay on your feet and then get yards after the catch. So there is an opportunity. The offense can feel so different, even if it is filtered through some of the similar positions or similar. The plays are going to stay roughly the same. It's just who's the target. And as you mentioned, are you scheming for Tyler Warren, or are you scheming for a receiver? And then to really light a match on this whole conversation, then Drew Aller, one of the areas he needs to improve is to consistently hit receivers in a way that leads them into yards after the catch. There was a lot of times where it was spot ball, fall down, catch, play over. And so, being able to continue the play and get extra yards that aren't designed is also a really big, important part of the offense that doesn't have to filter through a tight end that does not run a 4-4 or 4-4-5 or whatever.
Right. And we got some discussion in the chat about, the drop off from Warren to Reynolds, not as big as someone say it was. I think the thing you have to remember here is Tyler Warren was an old guy. Like, he was a senior that worked into the player that he became. Like, he was always a really great athlete, had great size, had everything that came together, and it all came together. Luke kind of has a jump on him in terms of being a better receiver being a guy that, or at that age, being a guy that can, step in there and make those catches, because, Tyler was I don't want to call him a gimmick player, but they ran the Wildcat with him at that age.
Yep.
They ran, some things, but he also had Theo Johnson in front of him. He also had Brenton Strange in front of him. So Luke, I think, has a little bit more of an open path to make that happen. And the cool thing here is that Khalil Dinkins is a really good football player, but those are two different football players. Like, those are two different guys that can give you different things. And then you go to Andrew Rappelier, who also is a different guy. So the diversity of skill sets in that tight end room is going to open up some things for other people. And again, if you're scoring points, if you're making catches, if your quarterback has a higher completion percentage, doesn't matter where the ball goes. Like, if it goes to tight end, that's great. But I think we still see a little bit of comeback and a little bit of balance. Receivers up, tight ends down, not in the sense of lack of production, but
just volume.
Look at volume. I mean, that's what it comes back to for me.
Even James Franklin last week said, to paraphrase, I'd make the argument that if we had Tyler Warren and receivers, we would have a better offense, essentially, is what he said. We had receivers that did some good things, but guys that scared the conference, and you knew were going to get the ball and you couldn't stop that at certain times. Penn State would love to take a little bit of Tyler Warren, off of Tyler Warren's plate last year and diversify that attack. And that's the goal for this spring and for this upcoming year. Anything on the defensive side of the ball? I'll start off with Jim Knowles has started doing a Defender of the Day during spring camp, and you can see here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, if you're watching here, who they are. Davian Collins is one that's been named. There's been a couple other you'll see on the screen. A.J. Harris, Zakee Wheatley, Xavier Gilliam. What have you learned about the defensive side of the ball so far in spring?
I think I'm going to start doing one of these for like our site, but I think it would just be Greg every day. So I don't know if it'd be that productive, but yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this on my walk this morning. We have gone so far. So when the workout of the day and winter workouts started coming out, we said, hey, there's something to the motivational tactic of this. Sometimes guys pop up that aren't on the radar. Some guys that pop up and you're like, oh, this guy, maybe he was thinking about portal. Maybe they're doing that. So, but we've gone Donkey Kong off one side of the screen and back in the other. It's been one of those things where we think that the only reason they do them now is motivational techniques or tactics. And that's not necessarily the case. If you take a look at the feedback and you take a look in spring practice and you take a look at the guys that have won that so far, lines up pretty well. AJ Harris, Zakee Wheatley, those guys are dudes. Like, those guys are, probably going to be two of the better players at their position in the country. Xavier Gilliam, as a guy that we said over the weekend and in our notebook on Monday, some legitimate buzz for him making some plays in spring camp. So I think that there's something to that to watch. It's not everything, but it's not just it's not a feel good. It's not a participation trophy or whatever it might be. So I think that those are some guys that have started to step up. I would love to see that. Love to see the offensive side. We usually don't get to we get to the end of spring ball, and then we get the touchdown champions and the turnover or turnover kings and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think those are pretty accurate, and I'm excited to see the development. We had a long discussion on the board yesterday about where this defense stands as a whole, and they've got a lot of work to do. And Jim Knowles has a lot of work ahead of him. Jim Knowles is a pretty good coach. So we're going to see where that goes over the next couple of weeks. And flipping back to my first sort of warning is there are 3 practices in. So all that stuff we just said about receivers, all that stuff we just said about the defense, ton of work ahead of them to get where they need to be. And I think they know that.
Yep. And we'll be continuing to give you some of those looks coming up tonight. As Fitz mentioned, we're going to get our next look. So BlueWhiteIllustrated.com here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. We'll have James Franklin's full press conference after practice. You get the latest update on how he's viewing the team and all of that stuff. Now we got to get into what he said this morning on Between the Lines.
They have both gotten reps with runs.
I want to start with rewinding and talking about the transfer portal and some of the things we've discussed here on the show. James Franklin laid out the scenarios for what could have happened to his team if things had gone differently in the college football playoff. Maybe a situation that he would have liked if things had gone differently, but he reviewed some of the challenges in the calendar for college football that just don't make any sense.
Yeah. So let me say one more thing about our previous discussion about the transfer portal. Sure. Well, what about this? So Drew announces he's coming back.
I know where you're going.
Bo now goes into the transfer portal to look around to leave because he's leaving because Drew's coming back. Drew goes on fire during the playoff run and now turns into not only a first-round draft choice, which he was already projected to be, but now a top 5 pick. And he felt the pressure to make an announcement. And now all of a sudden we're in a position where we lost both of them. So that was a realistic concern for me and Drew and his family. So that could have been even crazier.
I just wanted to underline the fact that we were talking about this during the playoff, that nothing was settled with Drew Aller staying or going in the NFL draft if he were to have done what James Franklin just outlined, because I know what people may think of Aller, and there's a lot of opinions on the internet. If people who are around him are saying he would have been a first-round draft pick had he left this year, those are not people's opinions. Those are things they're being told by evaluators. So this whole it is very fascinating still that the transfer portal looms so large over the playoff and now spring football. It's going to be a real thing during spring football as well.
Yeah, it's the calendar. Like, how do you make that play? And he went and talked with Andy and Ari about Bo's situation and how Bo wanted to stay and the tough conversations that were had. It's just not feasible to make that work. Like, because if he, I don't want to go back to December here, but like if he sticks around, he maybe doesn't have a starting spot in Missouri. Maybe he doesn't have a starting. Probably has a Power 5 starting spot, but maybe he doesn't have the optimum opportunity. And that's what going in the portal is about: is getting the top opportunity that you can possibly find and making it work to your, to your advantage. So
he's not Aaron Rodgers. He can't stare out into the ocean, into the void, into the ennui, and decide whether or not he wants to go to Minnesota or not. He's got to actually make a decision because there's the time crunch.
Or Pittsburgh. But there's that. And then there's, the realistic notion of this, if he would have balled out, I know this is it's a complete hypothetical. I hate hypothetical conversations, but completely balls out, he's a number 1 pick. Like, what do you say to that? You can't, if you're James Franklin, you tell him, hey, if you're the number 1 pick, you gotta go. Like that's how that works. It's such a tough situation, and it just goes back to the calendar. Like, I don't know. My problem with having this conversation is I don't have a solution to it. I don't have a way to say that this is the easiest way to make this thing work, because when you do that, you find the hole in that, and then you find the sort of the back door in how it doesn't work. So I don't know what the solution is. I'm really glad it didn't happen for our sake, from a covering the team perspective. And again, Drew's got a ton of work to do. I think he knows that. James was asked about that, and he gave his everything answer, which is true. I mean, he says so many things, and I start to sound like Nate here, but he says so many things that are like right on the nose, and you take it as coach speak because we're so used to coach speak, where he has to work on everything. He knows that is the elephant in the room, that he needs to win those big games, that he needs to make the plays in the big games, and he needs to run the offense and be quicker and more agile and all that kind of stuff. He knows that stuff, but it's true. When it's true, it blurs that line between coach speak and what you think you want to hear. I think that's probably the way to go. Yeah,
I go back to, and this is just you kind of sparked something in back when we first got a chance to talk to Drew Aller, the freshman availability in February. He talked about how in a practice, he would write down 3 things he wanted to improve that day. But it's not like it's the same 3 things. Like, there's 1,000 things you need to do. So if you are focusing your attention on 3 things you want to improve today, it's something different tomorrow. And eventually, like it's the everything bagel of all the things you want to improve, but you just can't do it all at once. But you are working on all. Great players aren't like, you know what, I'm going to work on my jump cuts. It's going to be everything, and emphasizing maybe some of the areas that you are deficient, but you're still working on your strengths as well. Anyway, I think the other thing that was interesting, he also mentioned some of the things that he was willing to do to help Bo Prabula in the situation. Go check out the video for the full conversation about that, and what was really a turbulent time and for Penn State football to make all those decisions and go on a playoff run. Fast forward to the spring, and there's this conversation about general managers in college football. As it becomes more professional, are there going to be GMs that work like a coach and a GM at the NFL level? James Franklin has talked about this. He didn't say anything necessarily too revolutionary, but it is interesting to see the process of they're open to something like that at Penn State.
It's poured a lot of people kind of into this role now, and created some opportunities for people that are already doing it. So I think the important thing is not going to hire somebody just so you can say you hired somebody. You got to find the right fit. And sometimes you can have somebody that, is a former player or an alumni of the university that has gone on to the NFL and done some really good things and wants to come back and have an impact. And you're able to get a really high-end person in that position. But for us, we got really good people here, and we weren't able to find the right fit that made sense. So we'll keep looking. We were able to bring back one of our former players, and he's done a really good job of working in this area. And he was actually working as a player rep in terms of representing players as an agent. So he gives us a different perspective in that room as well. And I think that's been valuable. But everybody's kind of looking at this and trying to put together the best they can from a personnel department. And we've done the same thing.
The player he's talking about, Aeneas Hawkins, former Penn State defensive tackle, who,
by the way, he definitely forgot Aeneas' name, right?
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Just like I forgot Polo, he forgot Aeneas, who he just hired. But the part here that I think is interesting is before that clip, he's talking about Andy Frank and his role within the organization and how he fills a lot of needs for Penn State that were kind of GM-like even before this was a position. What is the difference between what a GM would be doing and what Andy Frank does? And does Penn State need one of those people to come in and solidify that position? I guess is the question here. Do they need that if they already have Andy Frank?
No, I think they have. I think they're looking for complementary pieces, and that's part of bringing Aeneas in with his agent background, with his NIL background specifically. And I think they're going to keep looking at expanding. You talk about a cap manager or something along those lines. I think that's probably the next step. I thought it was interesting because it's never been about replacing Andy Frank. It's been about putting the pieces that work together in different segments. So Andy has headed up the recruiting department for years. He's got a bunch of guys that work under him, like Kenny Sanders and Alan Zamitis and all those guys. And they've been successful with that. But when you expand the universe there, you've got different priorities. You got different things that work. So it's not about bringing in somebody above Andy. It's about bringing somebody sort of on that level to sort of run the personnel aspect of the next level of personnel aspect of it. So you're talking about contract negotiation. You're talking about, I don't want to say scholarship numbers, but like you're talking about roster management essentially. So I think that's what you've got going. You've got the balance between everything, and probably out of line to say this, but like the GM hires, yes, they're important, but the ones you see going for like $1,800,000, I don't know that the proof of concept is there to put all that on one person's plate and to sort of hold that up. I think it's got to be an entire staff working at getting to where they need to be. So that's my thought on it. And we reported a couple months ago that Andy was the GM, and when you talk about a search, I think you're talking about different elements of that machine more so than just a guy that lords over everything.
Yeah. And I mean, the best GMs in the NFL have the final say, but they have a collaborative experience of pro personnel, college personnel, and bringing all of that together. Maybe you have a final decision maker. The part that is interesting about college football is the final decision maker is the head coach. He's classically, that's the person that has control over the roster. And so if a head coach gives that up now, that is very against college football's kind of structure.
I'm fascinated to see, because I think it probably goes in that direction eventually. But this current crop of college coaches, successful college coaches that are, James Franklin's been here for 12 years. Dabo's been there forever. This group of college coaches have this structure in mind where they run everything. And that's the way it's worked for so long. Change is scary, but change is probably inevitable. How does the GM go from a guy like Andy Frank, who has worked under James Franklin for 15 years, I think he said it was, to a guy that works under Pat Kraft and that sort of lords over the football ecosystem more than anything? So that's my curiosity. The coaches won't want to give it up, but at some point, something's got to give. So I'm very curious. And then that's probably a 10 or 15 year conversation more so than anything. But how does the GM, we mentioned Stanford last week, and Andrew Luck fired the coach, but he's basically an athletic director more so than a GM. So how does this power structure change over the next 10 or 15 years is probably what's most fascinating to me.
It's also interesting, you I don't know if it's worth even talking about. Like, eventually James Franklin could transition to just a GM and they could hire a coach, and that'd be a weird dynamic of the former coach being in the program. But, like all of these things, the future is so very unsettled and has been completely disrupted for 4 or 5 years now that any idea you have, it feels like it's reasonable to have that on the table.
And the general manager term is tough because you've got the NFL mindset in mind, but you've got a pool of players that you go to. You've got a pool of players in high school recruiting, but like you can still find guys that other people can't find. NFL, it's a little bit different because you kind of know what's out there. So absolutely, you can find gems in the NFL. Don't get me wrong, but it's a different kind of scouting.
It's a streamlined process.
Yeah. Is the GM a contracts negotiator guy? Is he a talent scout department guy? Is he a CEO under a CEO? Like there's so many different things that general manager is kind of just a broad term that we've started using, and it probably doesn't particularly represent what everybody needs. So I still think Penn State looking for a cap guy. Still think Penn State looking for a contract guy, although Aeneas, could probably fit in that mold with his background. So like there's a lot of loose ends to tie up. Not necessarily a million a year GM it's not necessarily the outcome here.
Yeah. We'll have more of those conversations throughout the offseason. There's more that we didn't get to in the conversation, including James Franklin talking about the receivers, giving you an idea about what we already covered, Devontae Ross and Kyron Hudson, but also the comment that I don't want to put words in his mouth. Maybe they weren't the first choices they would have made had everything been a fair and level playing field in the transfer portal, or at any position were they able to get the best players available because were they even available in the transfer portal? Things he's already mentioned before in the past. What we have to get to now are your comments and questions in the BWI mailbag. And as the chat has requested, we're going to get back to talking about practice, man. We're talking about practice. So practice coming up tonight. Christian wants to know, what are you most excited to see, or what are you looking at for today's practice? So Fitz, what are you looking for in today's practice? What are the things that you think are interesting that you want to get an updated, refreshed look at in our since last week?
Yeah, just take a look at the secondary personally. Like I'm on the defensive field, so I'm on the boring field. I'm sorry about that. It's gonna be you and me, T. Frank. Greg's coming up as well, so he'll be floating on the offense, and maybe I'll sneak a peek over there. But the secondary is still something where I think they've got some not kinks to work out, but they've got some personnel to work out. You've got Wheatley and Harris, and you feel pretty good about that. Elliott Washington, be surprised if he wasn't a starter, but Davian Collins is right in there. And how do things work? And I'm not sure that we get the time and the like the specific access where we can see this, but how do things work with the hybrid positions? Because we've talked about King Mack, we've talked about Zion Tracy and some of these other guys, but who steps up in those roles and who is kind of, sort of feeling themselves right now? Like practice 4, you're getting into a groove, you're feeling pretty confident. You're feeling as though you can start to put some separation between you and the guy behind you, and you're feeling like you can't fall back behind the guy ahead of you. So the secondary, I think, is a great example of this, because there's a lot of talent there, but you lost a lot of experience with KJ Winston and Jalen Reed. I know Winston missed last year, but you lost a lot of experience there. You lost a lot of experience with Jalen Kimber, who I think classically underappreciated. We'll probably talk about him in a second, but I think there's some stuff to work out there. And then you go back to the D line, because that's going to be a storyline all year, all spring, all summer, and into preseason camp. Gilliam's done some nice things, but you need more than 2 defensive tackles. You need more than a couple of defensive ends. So excited to see how those guys are progressing. Again, I don't know that we see too much coming out of the live practice, but the feedback so far, there's been a bunch of it. Check it out, bluewidowsthread.com.
Yeah, I'm actually jealous of the defensive field. I haven't been over there in so long, and I want to know, I want to see what I can see with the secondary. But literally, it's hard to see because they're the farthest away from where we're allowed to stand. So it's one of those situations where taking and we won't get as much time as we did last week, I'm assuming. So we might even see, like, we got the high water mark of what we were going to get from spring practice in terms of visual observations. I guess to me, I'm interested in the offensive line. I didn't spend as much time with them as I did in previous weeks because I wanted to take a borderline obsessive look at the receivers. But I want to get back into the quarterbacks and the passing game progression, and then the offensive line. Who's where? This is the time of year to experiment with guys in different positions, and how are they looking in the lineup? How confident are they looking? Who's getting extra time with offensive line coach Phil Troutwine? The question here in the chat from Eric, follow up on what you were talking about, is the second safety between Mack and Lane. I want to ask you a slightly different question. So, I hate having the conversation of safety because to me, like, Penn State has played two different safety positions, boundary and field, and they have slightly different responsibilities. Guys can play multiple positions, but you have to have a starting spot. So when we talk about what I'm assuming is going to be happening is you have Zakee Wheatley at the boundary safety, and then Eric is asking about the second safety between Mack and Lane. Does that position inform what happens in the nickel, in the hybrid position? Because if Dejon Lane doesn't take the step you're expecting, don't you then need to kind of backfill that with a guy like King Mack that at least is an experienced player at the position? And how do you think these moving pieces are going to affect one another in the secondary?
I mean, you need more than two safeties, right? You need more than three safeties. We saw it last year. Penn State didn't make it very far with their three safety look, and then all of a sudden had to scramble and figure out some more things. And that's why you saw more corners playing, things like that. So you've got to have all those guys on deck. So you're talking about beyond Lane, Mack. You're talking about what can you get from Lamont Payne and Antoine Belgrave-Shorter, Vabu Torre, those guys, Colin Dinkins as well. So it's all going to sort of mesh into that. And I think that goes back to it's pretty early in spring. So we're not really sure. And we've had some notes on it. Definitely check it out. I was in the defensive notebook yesterday, but I think everything is going to play off of everything in that secondary, because is your best five back there three corners and two safeties? Is it three safeties, two corners? I think probably right now it's corner. But at the same time, you've got specific skill sets, and you wrote about King Mack yesterday on the site, specifically playing in the nickel. Like, how do you find Daquan Hardy? Basically, is I think where they're at right now.
Yeah. Let's get to this question here from Poncho 570. He asks, what position battles need to be settled by the end of spring, and which ones can go into fall camp or the first few games? I think the stock answer is they all go past spring football. My first salvo would, you need a decent idea of who your middle linebacker is going to be by the time you're ending spring football. Fitz, do you agree with that? And is there another position you would say, like, okay, we know X position is going to go into the fall camp, but you have a pretty good idea of who's going to be Y on the team before we start the summer period where they're in individual practices?
I don't have a strong opinion on this because I'm going to go into my Nate Bowerism here. You want to keep everybody on the roster, right?
Yep.
Like, that's kind of the game here with spring ball. And you got to keep those guys engaged. You got to keep those guys, like, some of those battles you'll have a good idea after spring. And, I think the players sometimes understand it more than the fans even. Storm Duck was out of here after a spring because he didn't think he was going to play. Like those are the kind of things that the players can pick up on. But if it's legitimately close, you got to keep that rolling for your team's sake and for the player development sake, because guys get better. Like, guys, you can't win a job in the summer, but you can put yourself in position to do so in the summer. So I think that a lot of those go. I do agree with the philosophy of a Mike linebacker being in place, but also I'm very curious if a Mike linebacker is a thing on this defense. Like, if a true Mike linebacker is a thing on this defense, whereas you've got Tony Rojas, who's played a bunch of football, Dom DeLuca, who's probably played more football, and then Keon Wiley, who's a veteran as well. Like, does it matter who's the Mike, like the 240-pound run stuffer? No, right. I don't think it matters as much. But you want to have a situation where you've got your veterans that have a handle on everything. That's why Kobe was so important. Kobe's a great player, don't get me wrong, but like, his command of everyone around him is really what helped that defense out.
That's, I think, the part where when I'm saying you need a Mike linebacker, that's the part I'm talking about. Somebody to line the defense up that has the green dot, that's in control, as opposed to, do we need a guy with a neck roll? Those are absolutely very different things. They usually come in the same package, but they don't always have to. Last question here on the show. This is from Losi's Mustache. T. Frank, after Pro Day, if I set the over-under on Penn State players getting drafted in April at 5.5, are you taking the over or the under? I am taking the over. I went into the Pro Day thinking that was going to be the case, and I think there's that is, I don't want to say a lock, but it's pretty close when you've got the top two, Abdul Carter and Tyler Warren. KJ Winston running a 4.5 on one leg is amazing. Jalen Reed already did what he needed to do at the NFL Combine. Those guys are going to be day 2 picks. And then you look at what Jalen Kimber was able to do. He did not get invited to the Combine. He runs a 4.39. By the way, you can watch all the 40s here on the YouTube channel. Posted those yesterday. And then the guy that I don't know if he's going to get drafted, but like put up the best day. And I know I forgot about Kobe King here for a second, but we just talked about him. Kazai Izzard is a freak athlete. He ran a 4.81 at 305 pounds. I mean, everything he did that day screams, this is a draftable player, but the film is not. So I would say it's 6, and then you've got a wild card of, does somebody take a flyer on a highly talented, underperforming player in the 7th round in Kazai Izzard?
Yeah, I mean, it's all projection, right? Like you look at a guy with a 305 pounds frame, 33.5-inch vertical, 4.45 shuttle. Like you mentioned the 40, but like those other times are really impressive. So Keziah helped himself get into camp at the very least. So I think that's what he's got going for him. By the way, you didn't mention Julian Fleming's world record-setting 3-cone Jill, according to Penn State. 4.60 is not possible. It's a data entry error. We've gone on a quest to try and find the actual time, but I think the scouts are hoarding that one. So, but yeah, I mean, it's going to be borderline. Kimber's the interesting one to me because I do think he helped himself, and I think he helped himself with the tape this year because his tape at Florida, not great. So it's still a borderline situation, but when you've got that athleticism, 10.3 broad, 33.5-inch vertical, 4.22
6'1", yeah.
And
he's got the film to play as a zone corner. And I think that's really, I went back and I watched him because I was curious about, like, he was almost like an offensive lineman. I didn't see him a whole lot last year. We didn't talk about him a whole lot, but it felt like a good thing. And I went back and I watched, and his zone work was much better than it was at Florida. And he wasn't put in as many man coverage situations to essentially set up to fail because he had a pass rush this year. And there was nobody that got away from him athletically. Ball production is one thing, but if you can stay with somebody and be preventative maintenance, I think he's a guy that has all the physical tools to play in the NFL. There's some upside there, older player, but you feel confident that the floor is higher than I think a lot of people are thinking about with him.
Yeah, and I think that you hit on one of those things that might keep him from being drafted. He is an older guy. Like, he's been around for a long, long time. So how much more juice is there to squeeze from that? It wouldn't shock me. Like, him being drafted would be, I would call him like right on the level, mild surprise, whatever. But him going as an undrafted free agent and making a team, I could see that actually. Yes, maybe even a little bit more because he's got a really nice skill set. So I'm very curious to see which way that goes. And I think that he's got the physical abilities to make that work, and he's played a lot of football. So that is something that the scouts do like. Yeah, it's something to be said for a guy that can come in and play. And you don't have, he's not a 20-year-old that it's like, well, by year 2 of his rookie contract, he'll be good. Like, this guy is going to come in and be 3/4 of the way there. We'll see if a team thinks that's valuable enough to take in the draft. But I would. I mean, if I needed a bottom of the rotation corner, I needed to buttress some depth, and maybe a guy that I have an eye towards a little bit of upside. I mean, I guess that's why I said I'd have 6 guys, because I would draft him as well. That is all we have for today's show. Thanks for being here. I'm Thomas Frank Carr, Sean Fitz. We're going to be back later today, as I mentioned, with practice, our observations at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. James Franklin's press conference coming up later. We'll have great content. There's so much stuff. We have a text thread of like just basically traffic control of who's going to post when on the site. So make sure you get all that content, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. And, of course, subscribe to this video, subscribe to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, because any new subscriber, you're entered to win a subscription to all that information. After Blue White Weekend, we're going to pick 5 winners. I'm Thomas Ryan Carr. We'll talk to you tomorrow on the BWI Live Show.